Hi everyone, it's Daisy here. Welcome to today's Fountain Pens Explained video all about common fountain pen mistakes. Today's video is inspired a lot by people who come to the store and have never picked up a fountain pen before, and then these are the common mistakes that we see people make all the time. They're very understandable mistakes, so don't feel too embarrassed if you've done this before, and it's not the end of the world at all if you've done this before. So if you've gotten a fountain pen for the first time, or it's your very first time even thinking about a fountain pen, these are some of the things that you might want to keep in mind as you're trying out a fountain pen for the very first time. So I will dive right in, and if you own a fountain pen already, you probably know most of these things already, but maybe you don't, so let me know in the comments if you learned something new from this video. So the very first thing that I'm starting off this list with is writing with a nib inverted. So it's very interesting because in store we have all of our fountain pens laid out for everyone to try, and they're just kind of wide open on our tester table in store. And a lot of the times, people who are approaching the fountain pens probably don't even necessarily know that they're picking up a fountain pen to write with for the very first time, and maybe it is their first time writing with a fountain pen. And a lot of people will actually begin writing with the nib inverted. It's really interesting to me because I've written with fountain pens for so long, so what I mean by that is that, so this is a fountain pen, this is a Kaweco Sport that I have in my hand, and the right side of the nib is with this metal part facing up. And when I say inverted, I meant like this. So a lot of the time, for somebody's first time ever picking up a fountain pen, uncapping a fountain pen, putting nib to paper, they will write with it like this. And I always think that's really interesting. I kind of just, if I see someone writing with it like that, then first of all, I know that they're not getting the best experience out of the fountain pen. For the best writing experience with a fountain pen, you actually want to write with it with the metal part facing up like this. So you want to be looking at that shiny metal part, whether it is silver colored or gold colored. Sometimes it's copper, or sometimes it's like all these different colors that nibs can come in. Sometimes they're black. So you want to look at that metal part up facing you with the breather hole usually, and the ideal angle that you want to be writing at on the paper is actually a 45-degree angle. So if you write with your nib like this, that is how you will get the intended line width and the intended experience that the manufacturer created this fountain pen for. So you can see if you write with the nib inverted, it's going to be a lot scratchier and a lot finer of a line. And this is interesting because some really experienced fountain pen people actually purposely will invert the nibs of their fountain pens to do things like underline, just to see, just to kind of highlight as they're reading, and just to kind of get a different line width that you normally can achieve when you're writing with the nib right side up. So this is something that some fountain pen owners do and do regularly, and some people do it as part of testing out a fountain pen as well. But for the ideal performance of a fountain pen, you really want to be writing with the nib, that shiny part facing up towards the sky, and with the pen angled at a 45-degree angle for a regular nib. There are some special nibs that are ground a particular way that you should be writing with it more angled or less angled, but in general, the angle is 45 degrees. That's like that sweet spot right there. Okay. The next mistake that we see happening in store from time to time is just too much pressure on the nib. The reason that people sometimes will apply pressure on the nib is because there is like this common perception that fountain pens are for calligraphy. And calligraphy pens, a lot of them are meant to be written with a certain amount of pressure, and the tines of the nib are meant to separate as you apply more pressure along the nib. But for modern fountain pens that are created today, most modern fountain pens are actually not meant for calligraphy at all, and they're not meant to have flexible nibs that separate out to create a varying line width. So I'll show you all what I mean. So this gold part of the fountain pen is the nib. So if you look closer at the nib like this, you can see a little separation in the very tip of the nib, and the separation, that line is what separates the two tines of the nib. So kind of think of like tines on a fork. So there's like, fork tines that look like this, but fountain pens have two tines that look like that. And for calligraphy pens, if you push down on those two tines, the tines will actually separate and they will create a thicker line width for you, which is what's allowing calligraphy to happen, which is giving you those really thin strokes and really thick strokes. And that combination of those really different strokes is what makes beautiful calligraphy possible. But for a regular modern fountain pen, the best way that you're supposed to write with it is actually just by applying the least amount of pressure. And that is actually one of the ways you can kind of test out to see how good a fountain pen is and how flowy it is. So a fountain pen is supposed to have ink that flows really, really easily, really smoothly out of the tines, out of the nib, simply by putting it to paper and applying no pressure at all. So right here, I'm not applying any pressure at all, and the ink is like really kind of smoothly coming out onto the paper. And that's what you would expect of a high quality fountain pen. And some really, really high quality fountain pens will be even smoother than this one here, with even flowier, wetter ink flow. That is the number 2 mistake that I see people make all the time in store, is that they think that if they press down hard on a fountain pen, it will create a thicker line width. And while that will happen, if you press down hard on the tines, it will create a thicker line width, but sustained pressing down, sustained pressure and repeated pressure like that with your fountain pen will actually cause the tines to separate permanently, and they won't bounce back anymore. So it'll create like a permanently thicker line, and over time your fountain pen might not even write as well as it once did. So you really want to use a very light touch when it comes to writing with your fountain pen. All right, that brings us to the next common mistake that we see happening from time to time in store. And this isn't something that we see in store, but it's something that we hear about from customers in store all the time. And it's using the wrong kind of ink in your fountain pen. So fountain pens are designed to accept fountain pen ink and anything that's labeled as fountain pen ink. So there's all kinds of inks out there. There's drawing inks, there's India ink, there's walnut ink, calligraphy inks, dip pen inks, and all of these inks out there are not necessarily safe for your fountain pen. Fountain pen ink is a lot more water-based, and the composition of fountain pen ink is really just water and dyes for the most part. So it is a very water-based fountain pen ink that goes into your fountain pen that allows really, really smooth flow from ink to paper. And if you put some kind of India ink or drawing ink into your fountain pen, it's actually more likely to clog up your feed and your nib and give you issues down the road with your fountain pen drying out. Another kind of like ink no-no, I would say, is actually using shimmer ink inside an extra fine fountain pen. So you might be guilty of this because maybe there was like an ink that was just too beautiful to resist. There are so many great shimmer inks out there today. But if you have tried putting a shimmer ink into your fountain pen that is an extra fine or fine nib, your fountain pen may have gotten clogged. And the reason for that is just that glitter ink, shimmer ink has actual glitter particles suspended inside the ink bottle. And if you flip the ink upside down, I actually happen to have one here. If this is a bottle of shimmer ink, and if you flip it upside down, you can see There are really, really fine glitter particles suspended. Right now it's not suspended because you have to shake up the bottle, but they are there at the bottom of this bottle. If you shake it, they're in the ink. And what will happen if you put this kind of ink into an extra fine or fine fountain pen is that the little glitter particles will just get in the way of that flowiness of your fountain pen. It'll clog it up and eventually it'll probably completely stop writing. You'll be able to wash it out after this, of course, but you'll have to wash it out thoroughly just to prevent any issues coming up down the line. So if you have a beautiful shimmer ink, glitter ink that you want to use, we always recommend using a medium, broad, or a stub nib for those kinds of inks. The next mistake that I want to talk about does happen from time to time. It's unfortunate, but it does happen from time to time. And this one is just dropping the pen. This is an ouchie. I feel like when I talk about it, sometimes I like wince a little bit, but it's happened to a lot of fountain pen people. And if you've never owned a fountain pen before, it's just something that you want to be careful with. So fountain pens often, look like this. And when you're writing with it, say you're writing with this one, if you leave it uncapped just to put it down for a second, maybe get a drink of water, or you get distracted as you're writing, you put it down. If you leave it uncapped and the table moves, the pen will roll away, especially if there's no stopper, or especially if it's very flat like this one, it might just roll away. And then if the nib is dropped face down onto the floor, your pen will pretty much be out of commission. Some brands make replacement nibs that you can swap out, but you definitely, I would say, I always cap my pen as I'm walking away from it, even as I'm putting it down for a second. And I recommend that you do too, to prevent you dropping your nib on the floor. But let me know in the comments if you've ever dropped your nib on the floor and tell me that horror story, because I have horror stories to share with you as well. Okay, so that brings me to my last most common mistake that we hear about in store from customers, and this one is just drying out the pen. So this is probably, this might be the most common fountain pen mistake to make, and it's a very, very understandable one, and I'll explain a little bit. So fountain pens need to actually be written with from time to time pretty regularly to prevent from ink drying out. Because as opposed to ballpoint pens, gel pens, because fountain pen ink is the closest to water, it's also the easiest to dry out in your fountain pen. So if you have left your fountain pen without writing it with it for a month or 2 or 3 months or 4 months or longer, chances are when you are coming back to it, it is going to either be really, really scratchy, the ink won't flow, won't really come out, or it'll feel like it'll start and then stop, it'll start and stop. Or you'll put the nib down to the paper and just no ink will come out at all. And the reason for that is just that the ink has dried up. The ink has dried up in the nib itself, so in here. The ink has also dried up in the feed, which is this black plastic part here. What you have to do at that point is actually just wash your fountain pen out with water, or you can let it soak overnight in some water, maybe some soapy water if it's a really severe case. But what you can do to prevent drying out your fountain pen is simply to write with it once a week, once every couple of days. And if you do this, you won't run into any issues with your fountain pen drying out whatsoever. Another thing that helps prevent from fountain pens drying out is having a fountain pen with a screw cap like this. This Kaweco has a screw cap like this. So it just makes it a little bit more airtight, which gives the ink a little bit of a longer life inside that capped pen, even between uses. Okay, so there you have it. Those are the 5 most common mistakes that we see with fountain pen newbies. If you're a fountain pen beginner, I hope this video helped you get off on the right path. But if you did make any of these mistakes, I think most of the time a fountain pen is salvageable, except for if you dropped it on its nib, then you might need to get a new fountain pen. But for the most part, these are not like mistakes that you cannot come back from. So if you've made some of these mistakes, if you can relate to this list, let us know in the comments, share your horror stories with us so that nobody has to go through the same horror. And I hope you all enjoyed this video. It was a fun one for us to think about and to make. And thank you for watching. Bye.